In this video, I want to talk about the 70D and the Canon T5i or 700D. Battle of the Sevens. I'll even throw in the 7D towards the end of this discussion. But mostly, what I want to walk through is kind of the body, features, and performance of these two cameras and talk about similarities and the differences. Now, I know a lot of my followers or watchers or subscribers probably already have a Canon T5i in hand. That's how a lot of you found me through those videos. There may be, this is a little bit of a disclaimer, a little bit of a warning, there may be at times where you're feeling a little discouraged during this video because the Canon 70D is a very feature-rich camera. It has borrowed a lot of features, or not borrowed, but taken a lot of features from higher-end cameras and has crammed them into this smaller, not a full pro body, and it's done a very nice job with that. But the bottom line is both of these cameras in day-to-day shots produce very nice images and video. You may just have to work a little bit harder with focusing video in the T5i, but we'll get into that. Let's dive right into the discussion of the body. The first main difference that is noticeable when holding the 70D is that it is a heavier, more solid feeling in your hands camera. It's about 30% more weight. We got about 1.25 pounds here, over 1.5 pounds here. It's not an insignificant difference when you're talking that, you know, they already weigh about 1.5 pounds and 1.75 pounds. It's about 30% heavier of a camera. But it does feel a little more solid in the hand. It gives you a little bit more depth to grip, and the height is a little bit more, so your hand fits a little more nicely. The T5i feels fairly light in the hand and is decent to grip, but not as substantial feeling as the 70D. So I think really as we go through this, there's going to be really two big differentiating factors in whether or not you want to step up to the 70D. One, do you want to pay more money? Two, do you want to carry around with you a heavier camera? Remember, the best camera is going to be the one that you have with you all of the time. And if you get tired very quickly of carrying a 70D, then that might not be the best choice for you, even if it has more features. So let's continue on with the discussion of the differences of the bodies. So the viewfinder on the 70D is a pentaprism viewfinder. It's a little bit bigger and a little bit brighter. The bigger doesn't have anything to do with a pentaprism, it's just a little bit bigger. Brighter does have to do with a pentaprism, a brighter viewfinder. We have a pentamirror over on the T5i. It's just not as bright, not a huge difference, but looking through them side by side, you notice it. Focusing in low light, it is nice to have that brighter viewfinder for you to decide what you're focusing on. It doesn't really make a whole lot of difference as far as the camera's focusing, but the 70D does do a little bit better job there. The styling in general of the 7D is borrowing a lot from the professional line. I said that. We have our dedicated row of buttons across the top. We have an LCD display that shows you a lot of features or settings of the camera, so you can see at a glance right there on that screen without having to look at the back or activate the large display screen. Very friendly for one-handed operation. You have the row of buttons you can press, move a dial, rotate a dial. Also, because you have two dials on this camera, manual mode is a little bit more friendly. Top one works shutter speed, back one works aperture. On the 700D or the T5i, you have to hold down a button. Same dial does shutter speed or aperture, depending whether or not you're holding down that AV button on the back. Not a huge difference, but it is a difference nonetheless. Both are sharing these wonderful touch screens. The 70D touchscreen is using that slightly updated firmware that we saw on the SL1 as well, which gives it one extra menu item in there that is you can control the touch sensitivity of the touchscreen. I've never changed it from anything other than standard, and I found it to be absolutely fantastic. The dial, because we have the LCD screen on the right-hand side, the dial is on the left. It is a locking dial, so you have to push a little button. The T5i does not have a locking dial. Gone are all of the kind of like fakey basic modes of sports and macro. Those are all, I don't want to say hidden, but they're all kind of consumed under the scene mode on here. And you do have bulb mode on here. Bulb mode is available in the T5i as well, but you just have to go into manual and keep rotating until you go past 30 seconds shutter speed. One nice feature is that there is a single custom mode on the dial. That allows you to set up a variety of settings in the camera a certain way, save them, and anytime you rotate the dial back to C, all of those settings will reappear, and you can use that in a variety of ways. But otherwise, very, very similar there. The back here, nice large grip for your thumb, and we have this kind of borrowed from the 5D Mark III, the switch to switch back and forth between still shooting and video shooting, which is also our start and stop, and a dedicated back button for focusing. Both of these cameras share a 1 SD card slot, which if you've watched my 70D versus D7100, you know the D7100 does give you 2 SD card slots. That's nice for some flexibility, added security of backup if you want, but both of these cameras have just 1 card slot. One final note about the body or similarities of these two cameras is they both offer the same amount of output ports, or output and input, your mic, your remote, HDMI, and your AV. There is no headphone jack in the 70D, and I do find that somewhat disappointing. You can watch your audio levels in the little meter on the screen, but it is nice to have that option to hear those audio levels in real time, and you can't do that with the 70D or the T5i. Let's talk about the features now of these cameras. So the headline feature of the 70D is really that dual pixel autofocus, which means during live view, all of the sensor is dedicated to both capturing light and focusing. And the results of that are really, really impressive. I have videos that show those examples. You couple that with the touchscreen and you get what I'm basically calling rock solid focus. It nails focus almost every single time, and when you're using that touch screen to touch where you want it to focus, it does a very nice job of cleanly getting to that focus point. DSLRs in the past, and you'll see this on the T5i, you'll see this on the Nikon D7100, there is a little hunt for focus. Even with this touchscreen often, you will watch the camera, get focus, move a little bit beyond focus, and then come back to it. It's kind of like a double check. I got focus. Is that really focus? Yes, it is, and it comes right back. It's a little bit of a womp womp. I described it in my review or comparison of the 70D and the D7100. Now, when you use an STM lens on either of these cameras, it's very smooth, and that takes out some of the womp womp on the T5i. You get a much cleaner hit onto your focus point, but it is not as rock steady solid as it is in the 70D. This nails focus almost every single time. Now I'm saying almost every single time, not 100% of the time. It is still a DSLR. There are times where I was shooting with prime lenses and really narrow depth of field and it wouldn't quite get focus, but they were very rare. When you're shooting with primes or anything other than an STM on the Canon T5i, it is not nearly as smooth. You get a lot of noise as well. You get some noise over here. Lenses are going to make noises. The cameras can't really control that. But you do see a lot of that hunting for focus without an STM lens. Doesn't matter what lens you use over here. If it can autofocus with a Canon, it does a very nice job of locking in. Now, I'm sure there are some lenses out there that are probably really crappy. Somebody's going to throw one on and say, it does a really crappy job. Okay, most decent lenses, it is able to focus very cleanly, very quickly with the 70D. Now, I don't want to talk just about live view though, but I have been, repeatedly impressed with how fast live view is. That live view, the touchscreen combined with the touchscreen really makes this camera a lot of fun to use for landscape shots, anything without really quickly moving subjects. Live view still isn't up to snuff for those. Now, there's 19 cross-type points in here versus just 9 on the Canon T5i. There are 9 cross-type on the T5i as well, though. And it does a very nice job. It gives you a dedicated button to switch between your autofocus methods or modes and the points. And so very quickly you can select your different points. You can do that fairly quickly on the T5i as well with your little side button here back there in the thumb. But the 70D is really set up for that and borrows heavily from the 7D. I said I was going to mention that. The 7D really is one of Canon's champs in autofocusing until you're talking about the really high-end cameras where you're paying a lot of money. And the 70D has all of those features have come down into the 70D, and it's done a really, really nice job. Now, I'm not a birding photographer or wildlife photographer, but I have heard of very positive reviews from those folks on the 70D. And there's not a whole lot of reason to buy a 7D anymore unless you want that tank-like body and 8 frames per second. Now, moving on, the 70D gives you 7 frames per second and a nice buffer to really get those frames in. Let's see, I'm on manual mode. Let's listen in high here. That was a lot of raw frames. Let me make sure I'm shooting raw. That was a lot of raw frames. 7 frames per second and a decent buffer to give you a serious burst of images. T5i is about 5 frames per second. And you can hear that slow down fairly quickly. You can get less of a burst rate in there. I just was using a SanDisk Extreme in both of these cards, the exact same card in both of these cameras, so that was a fair comparison. Now, in addition to the high-speed method or the high-speed drive, you have a silent higher speed drive, and you have a lower continuous speed so that you're not firing off quite as many frames a second. I'm not sure what the actual frame rate of that is, but it gives you a burst without getting too many frames if you're worried about that or shooting on a slower card. There's no real excuses for shooting on a slower card. These SanDisk Extreme 16 gigabytes cost less than $20 right now. That's definitely $20 well spent to have a decent card in your camera. I hear about people buying really cheap cards these days that are really large, and a lot of them perform as well, but the quality control on those cheap cards is not the same as it is on these nicer name brand cards. And this is one place where I don't think it's worth it to skimp. Saving $5, maybe even $10 is just not worth it if you end up with a card full of corrupted images. All right, let's talk about some additional features that the 70D has that aren't available in the T5i. And this is where some of you T5i owners or folks that are on a tight budget and looks like the 70D might be too much of a stretch will cringe a little, because as I said, this is a feature-rich camera. So they both have HDR backlit control. I tested that in the Canon T5i and the 70D. It's not very impressive. The 70D also offers real HDR mode where it will take multiple shots, save those shots, and you have control over the amount and the type of HDR, a natural, an artistic, vibrant, and you have control over the latitude exposure of those shots from just +1, ±1, +2, ±3. T5i, you don't have any of those. You just have that one HDR backlit control, and you have absolutely no settings over that at all. Now, in addition to that, there is a host of bracketing control features in this camera for you to shoot bracketed images and then combine them afterwards in a program like Photomatix or Photoshop as an HDR image. So you have a lot of control over that, both in the custom menu and in the bracketing menu in this camera. You also have the fun multi-exposure shot where it'll overlay 2 images into one within the camera. And you have a variety of ways to combine those two, additive or subtractive. I can't even remember the other settings, but they're all in there. You also have raw processing, so you can be shooting full raw images on here. Oh, and you can choose different size raw images. So you can shoot a full raw, a medium raw, or a small raw, which is nice. And then you can process those in camera. So if for some reason all of a sudden you're at a buddy's house and they want to look or download a few images from you, they don't have any way to open a raw file, you can in camera spit out some JPEGs from those raw images and pass them off. Recent video though, you can also throw those up on Google Plus and edit them as well. So if you have a internet connection anywhere, you're pretty much able to take a raw file and turn it into a JPEG these days. But it's still nice to have that feature directly built into the camera. You have the option of setting, or by default, the option of setting 1/3 stop increments for your ISO. So you got 100 160, what is it, 125, 160, 200, 250, 320, 400, all the way up. That's nice for a little bit more finer control. You can see those ISOs when you shoot with auto ISO on the T5i, but you can't select them. When you're selecting your own ISO on the T5i, you can only go 100, 200, 400, 600, 800 on up like so. I mentioned the autofocus. You have really nice custom functions that give you very detailed control over the tracking and performance of the autofocus. In addition to that, you have micro focus adjustments, which is really nice that they've put that back in the 70D. It wasn't in the 60D, and a lot of people were upset because it was in the 50D. Micro focus adjustments allow you, when you put a lens on, there are times with certain lenses that when it thinks it's in focus, it's not quite in focus. It's either focusing a little forward of your point or a little behind your point. And using micro focus adjustment, you can say, anytime I have this lens on, make sure that you actually focus to in front. And there's just little guide numbers. And there's some testing you can do. You get yourself a little chart. I have one somewhere around here that you set up and you test. And so that's a nice feature that really lets you dial in and make sure each lens you're working with is going to be at its maximum sharpness at the point that you decide to focus. Maximum shutter speed on the 70D is 1/8000th of a second. We got 1/4000th of a second over here on the T5i. That's something that I don't use a whole lot, but it is nice shooting outside in brighter sunlight. When you want to shoot wide open with a prime lens, you want to give that nice blurry background, but it's a very sunny day, you can quickly find yourself running out of shutter speed to keep the image from being too bright. But being able to go all the way up to 1/8000th of a second oftentimes is going to be a fast enough shutter speed to keep out too much light and let you use those wide open apertures and get that blurry background. So 1/8000th of a second, 1/4000th of a second. Switching gears a little bit and talking about video, you do have the option of digital zoom in here. It's not completely useful, but it's a nice feature in there. It's 3 to 10x digital zoom, and it's not quite digital zoom. If you've been using a point and shoot, or if you've been shopping for a point and shoot in the last couple of years, everybody tells you to stay away from digital zoom because it's not very good, and that's true with point and shoots. But because this camera and these cameras aren't using the whole sensor when they're recording video, you can blow that image up a little bit and use a larger portion and get still good detail. At 10x though, that is a lot of zoom. I have some samples that show how much. Your quality is not impressive. But at 3x, 4x, it's pretty decent. But remember, any movements, even small ones, are going to be really greatly magnified by that magnification. So don't think that this is going to let you get amazing shots of your kid running across the soccer field. But there are certain uses for it that you might find useful. So one of the other big features of the 70D is the fact that it has Wi-Fi built in, and fairly robust Wi-Fi. You can connect it to a computer. You can connect it to a mobile device. One of the bummers that I have about the mobile device connection is that the largest file you can send over is this small JPEG size, which is the 1920 by 1080. So a small or a HD file is as large. You cannot send full resolution files over. You can to the computer. You can also upload to web services. I have found the Mac software at least to be very, very buggy. I haven't tested it on the PC side. On the mobile device, it works quite well. You can both pull images off, as I said, limited to that HD size. You can also do remote shooting, photos only. When you have Wi-Fi turned on, the video functions of this camera are completely shut off. That's a bummer as well. It'd be really nice to be able to do some remote video work. I don't necessarily feel like those videos need to stream to me, but I think I should be able to start and stop the video. On the T5i, you don't have any of those options. You could throw in an Wi-Fi card to have the ability to send images over to a mobile device, phone or tablet. And you can throw an Wi-Fi card. You can throw an Wi-Fi card in the 70D as well. That system's in the menu, and it's set up for it and supports it. Let's talk about the performance of these two cameras, or maybe better call these the results. Now, I said this at the beginning. In day-to-day shots, both of these cameras produce very nice images. When the light levels start to drop and your ISO goes up, you do see improvements from the 70D sensor. It is a new sensor and it is a slightly upgraded processor, and you do see the benefit or the results of that. But it really isn't until you hit 1600, especially 3200, that you see a difference. Below 1600 and these two images look very, very similar. And it's a 20 megapixel sensor versus 18. That is a very, very small difference. When you spread that around all four sides, it's not worth talking about more than that. It gives you a tiny bit more ability to crop, but really it is just a tiny bit. The big difference, of course, in using these two cameras is the autofocusing capability, both for stills, but especially for video. That is impressive. And so this is the most camcorder-like DSLR experience that you can have out there. You throw an STM lens on here, you have that silent focusing that is smooth. Now remember, it's smooth with other lenses as well, but it's only silent with the STM lenses, and the tracking works, the touch to focus works. It really is a lot of fun to use this camera with this touchscreen. Now, if you haven't watched my other videos, I want to make sure you know this. I was not excited about touchscreens in DSLRs at all. When it was announced with the T4i, I was like, you know, I really don't. I know where the buttons are. I know what I need to do. It's not something I'm really interested in. I wasn't thinking about the touch to focus. It just works really, really well. And again, not for all situations. Let's take the kid running across the soccer field again. Touch to focus on a fast-moving subject is not going to give you the best results. But for landscapes, macro, touch to focus, pinch to zoom in, zoom out, it really is quite a joy to use, and I've been having a lot of fun with this camera. Really nice kind of value, price, performance. Now, as I said at the beginning, it really kind of comes down to, one, do you have the budget for the 70D? Not everybody needs this. And two, even if you do have the budget, are you going to want to carry it around? It is a heavier, bulkier camera. Not a huge difference, but a noticeable difference. And so I want you to think about that, and also think about the leaving room in your budget for a nice lens or two, like a nice prime lens, and this camera is going to give you very, very good results. So it kind of depends on what your goal is in capturing with this camera. Higher speed action or sports, well then maybe you do want to pony up the extra money for the 70D. It will be worth your while. If you're just kind of family snapshots and travel, the T5i with the 18-135 is fairly light. It's budget friendly, leaves enough room in the budget hopefully for a prime lens like the 40 or the 50. I have videos talking about that as well, and does a very nice job. And in video mode with an STM lens, it does a capable job. It's just not almost professional level job like you see in the 70D. So that's a discussion of the Canon 70D and the Canon 700D or T5i. You know, it really comes down to what you need these cameras for. If you have any questions about which one you think is best for you, or you'd like my opinion on which one is best for you, come on over to my Facebook page. There's a link right down below, and leave me a message there, either public or private. I do a much better job of getting through everyone's questions there. Oftentimes there's just too many comments, especially after videos have been sitting for a while, and I don't do as good a job over here as keeping up with them as I would like. So take a second. If you really want an answer, come on over to the Facebook page and ask the question there. Thanks so much for watching, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. Thank you.